Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrew Stotts and I'm the Emperor of Stomaria. Today I want to discuss why communism is in fact evil.
This is how nations are built and empires are forged. For every nation that becomes integrated into the empire, for every territory that we acquire, for every citizen that joins us, for every drop of water we collect, for every seed that we sow, for every watt of energy we produce, for every silver bar that we stamp, we are securing our future.
So as many of our citizens, supporters and followers will already know, I've spent the last 6 months or so, at least in part, going through some of our older content, some of our older videos on this channel, and I've been trying to refine them, to add more detail where was necessary, and to take out any fluff, any unnecessary content where I could. And this is because our audience is always growing. The people that follow us, the people that are interested in us, is always growing. And I want to make content that is both useful to them, but is also a lot more professional and palatable to them. And so this is something that we did for the How to Make a Micronation series. So for those that don't know, that's one of our most popular aspects of our channel. And we go through a dozen or so videos where we discuss how you can start a micronation, going through the name, the flag, the government structure. And we have recently taken a lot of that content and refined it further. We're still only really just getting started with it, with the How to Start a Nation series, and this is where we've already discussed how to name your nation, how to come up with a flag for your nation, how to acquire territory for your nation, and then later on we are going to be discussing government structures, monetary systems, the economy, citizenship, diplomacy, all of these different topics that I think are relevant, but are nevertheless discussed in a lot more detail than we did before. And this video is no different. So a few years ago now, I published a video called Communist Micronations Suck. And it is one of the most popular videos on this channel and resonates strongly with a lot of people. We get a lot of likes, a lot of comments, and I get a lot of messages about this particular video because it does ring true for a lot of people. And I wanted to take that video and I wanted to expand upon it further because there is a lot more I could have discussed. There is a way I could have gone about re-emphasizing the position further, as the reason, the rationale as to why communist micronations do suck, but more broadly, why communism as an ideology is just evil. And of course, people that have been following this channel for a long time will know that I very rarely mince my words. That is to say, when I'm discussing a particular topic, when I'm covering a particular issue, I like to cut to the heart of that issue. And this is especially true when discussing matters concerning some of the most oppressive, brutal, and murderous ideologies around, communism being amongst them. So the first question that we should ask ourselves is, what is communism? So communism is a socio-political and economic ideology that revolves around common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, with products being allocated to people based on their needs. To quote Karl Marx, who sums this up quite succinctly, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And to accomplish this, communism requires the abolition of private property, of social classes, of money, and perhaps most paradoxically of all, the state. But before I delve into all of this, I'm sure there are some people out there that are asking the question, why? Why am I making this video? Why do I care? Why discuss communism? And I think the answer to that is very much twofold. The first is because of what Stomaria is, and what Stomaria stands for. Because Stomaria as a nation is not especially ideologically driven, just as I'm not a particularly ideologically driven individual. When I look at a problem, when I look at a particular topic or an issue, I try to think of the most pragmatic solutions based on rationalism and realism. And it just so happens that a lot of the time, the solutions to the problems that I see in the world can be achieved through minimal government interference. And in that sense, if you had to put Stomaria somewhere on the political spectrum, I suspect we would find ourselves somewhere as right libertarian, not least because some of our core objectives, some of our core values do revolve around personal liberty and natural rights. And that is to say that these are rights which respect your life, which respect your property, and respect your liberty. And this stands in complete contrast to the communist doctrine. But more than this, because of what Stomaria is, and because of what Stomaria used to define itself as, we are constantly contacted by micronations that have seen our content and want to be affiliated with us in some way. They want to create a treaty, they want to have a mutual recognition pact, they want to have a trade deal, they want something. And an uncomfortably large minority of these micronations define themselves as communists. Now, to have a micronation promote a vile ideology is nothing extraordinary. It happens all the time. Even a casual search online will reveal to you many dozens of micronations that have promoted fascism or neo-Nazism, with many having the term fascist in their very name. So it goes without saying as to what kind of micronations those are. But for some reason, communist micronations, the communist mantra, is far more widely accepted within the micronational community. And this is a problem for me, first and foremost, because of the typical demographic that tends to promote communism within that community. That is to say, it's normally children, adolescents, and young adults. And rather than having people who should know better within that community taking these young individuals to one side and saying, look, you should not be promoting this ideology. It's vile, it's murderous, it's oppressive, it's on par with the Nazi regime in Germany in the 1930s and 1940s in terms of its brutality, in terms of its murderous tendencies, in terms of its sheer despicable nature. It's just not something that you want to have tied to your name thereafter, because once you are public about this sort of thing, once it's on the internet, it could affect friendships further down the line. It could affect relationships further down the line. It could affect job opportunities further down the line if you associate with something as extreme as communism, which we'll get onto more in this video. But it bothers me that there aren't more people within the micronational community that can take a stance with this. Back when we defined ourselves as a micronation, back when Stomaria was a part of that community, we were very vocal. We were always vocal. We will always be vocal about the evils of communism and why you should not associate yourself with that ideology. But even though Stomaria no longer considers itself a part of the micronational community, we took ourselves out of the micronational community, in part largely because of the cesspit of the drama and the vile ideologies and the internal bickering and squabbling and the childish nonsense that goes on there. It was just a complete waste of our time. It wasn't what we were interested in and had very little to do with it at the best of times. But that all by the by, it is still very important to me because micronationalist or not, these young people are still people and they're still going to have lives in the real world. And I don't want their lives ruined, either if you are a child, an adolescent, a young adult, or even older than that, in which case you should probably know better anyway. But I don't want these people's lives to be ruined. I don't want them to be suckered in to promoting some of the most awful ideologies and the most awful historical calamities to ever grace the earth, certainly in the last 150 years or so. I don't want that association to be with them for the rest of their lives, and trying to talk them out of it is a very important point for me. So in short, the reason that I am making this video, the reason I am speaking out against communism, the reason that I'm trying to dissuade people from going down that path is because there are precious few others that are willing to do so. Within the micronational community, there has never been a concerted effort or particular interest in dissuading younger members of that community from going down that route. And I think that is a problem. I think that is wrong. I think that more people should be more willing to talk about these sorts of things, more willing to stand up for what is objectively true and objectively right. You don't have younger members of any particular community advocating neo-Nazism or fascism without someone standing up and going, yeah, don't do that. That's not right. This is the reason why it's not right, and set them on the right path. But for some reason, communism within that community, it just doesn't have that same impact. And I never really understood why. Because as we're about to go through, communism and neo-Nazism in particular, or Nazism rather, is that they're two sides of the same coin. That they're really just vile ideologies. They're about oppression. They're about murder, genocide, democide, politicide, whatever you want to call it, however you want to define it. It is about death on an industrial scale. And we are going to go through all of this in this particular video. But as I say, long and the short of it is, I'm speaking out because very few people, if anyone, is actually willing to do so. Now, we've already covered what communism is in theory, but what does it look like in practice? Because this is ultimately what matters. Now, Karl Marx, in the quote that I mentioned earlier in this video, said, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his need." And a lot of communists will be nodding there, going, yes, that is what communism is. And I don't think many people would dispute that. I certainly don't dispute that. And do you know who else would have that kind of mantra? Throughout human history, there's always been a group of people who believed in that same kind of philosophical position. And that would be slave owners. People that will extract what they can from a particular individual and then provide for them only what they need in an environment in which they are forced to work. Now, that is slavery by any dictionary definition. And that is highlighted further by the fact that you can have no private property because the state forbids it. You can have no private businesses. You can't have a private exchange with anyone within your community or outside that community because that, again, is forbidden. The centrally controlled state dictates the common ownership of production, of exchange, of distribution. None of that is something that can be done privately. That is the purpose of communism. And going far beyond that, you don't have freedom of choice. You don't have freedom of religion. You don't have freedom of association. You don't have freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of thought. The state controls every aspect of your life. And the state, of course, is this enormous bureaucratic entity which mismanages the economy, which stifles innovation, which prevents any kind of social progression and terrorizes anyone that dares to speak out against it. Because in order for communism to work, there has to be total compliance. The moment that the state loosens its grip, the people break free. We have seen this scenario play out time and again over the last 100 years across the world. And so the only recourse for the state is to crush any kind of individuality, any kind of liberty. And this sort of oppression has led to the deaths of tens of millions of people across the world through civil war, through famine, through work camps, through executions. And it's hard to imagine a more dystopian, nightmarish hellscape than a communist regime, one in which the elite will insist, even as the people around them die in the streets, are working horrific hours in horrific working conditions, are being executed or sent to work camps, that all of this is for the greater good, that the utopia that they have been talking about is just over that next hill. And if they just wipe out a few more people, a few more dissidents, a few more traitors, a few more wreckers, if we can just purge the party, purge the nation of all of these disruptive elements, then we will be able to achieve that full communism that they keep lauding about, that they keep discussing as if it's this holy grail that's just out of reach. And if we just push a bit harder, work a bit harder, kill a few more people, then we will get to that point. And that is the kind of attitude that these communist regimes have, because they have nothing else to work with. As I said, if they loosen their grip, the people will throw them out. So they have to tighten the grip. And that is why we have situations as we do today, where there is one of two scenarios. There is the case where you have Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Albania, Yugoslavia, and East Germany, for instance, all throwing off the shackles of communism. Even Russia itself did so. But alternatively, you have the likes of China, or North Korea, or Vietnam, some of the most authoritarian and oppressive regimes in the world. And that is not a particular coincidence, because, as I said, those are the two paths that you go down when you play around with communism, when you try to inject communism into the national governing body of your state, of your nation. It'll go one of two ways. Either the oppression will just get ramped up because they know that if they lose control of the population, if they loosen their grip, they will lose everything, or they go down that route and they do lose everything. Those are the two options on the table. And this is why you find some of the most oppressive regimes in the world are communist, because they know they can't take it to the level that they want it. They know that as soon as they get to a certain point, then it requires, communism to work requires complete compliance, but without force. They believe in the abolition of the state. They don't believe the state is necessary in theory, but in practice, it's the only way that they can maintain any kind of cohesive control over their society. And so what happens? You either get to a point where magically every single individual voluntarily agrees that this is the way to do it. We don't need a state because we know what we're doing and we're just going to cooperate freely amongst ourselves and establish those communes. That is what they are trying to achieve. But communism does not work like that in practice. In practice, it requires absolute top-down control and brutal oppression towards anyone that steps out of line. But I want to take this even further, because even though that, as I've said, communism is a failed system, before it even gets off the ground, it has already failed, because what it is trying to achieve, this utopian vision that it has, is impossible. And so what I want to discuss now is the first few steps that communism took in practice, in the real world, in the early 20th century, in Russia. Because I always find it interesting that the foundation of the Communist Party in Russia and the Nazi Party in Germany, the steps that took place in order to propel them to power, and the values and objectives they promoted, and the consequences of people getting behind them, I find it eerily similar. And so I just want to go through with that now. It's not hugely important or hugely relevant to this video exactly, but it does highlight a very important point to me, which is that communism and Nazism are, as far as I'm concerned, two sides of the same coin. They are both vile, oppressive, brutal ideologies that require complete compliance from the community in order to accomplish their goals, which normally revolves around purging their own community and other communities of dissidents, people disloyal to the state. So let's imagine that you're a soldier in the army during World War I, and you find yourself on the losing side. Your monarch abdicates, a new government is installed, and is forced to accept a humiliating peace treaty in which much of your nation's land has been confiscated and given to others. After internal turmoil and civil war, followed by economic hardship, a man with a funny moustache comes along and says he's going to make everything better. All he needs is your unwavering loyalty, and after imprisoning or executing the enemies of the state in an ongoing series of purges and persecutions that eventually culminates in the systematic murder of millions, you find yourself back on the front lines as your glorious leader starts invading neighbouring nations in one of the bloodiest, most destructive and most oppressive periods in human history. Now consider this, I'm going to show you 8 policy points, 4 from the Communist Party in Russia and 4 from the Nazi Party in Germany. Now without cheating, can you tell me which ones are from the Communist Party and which ones are from the Nazi Party? All citizens shall be equal as regards rights and obligations. The first obligation of every citizen must be to productively work mentally or physically. The activity of the individual may not clash with the interests of the whole, but must proceed within the framework of the whole for the benefit of the general good. The abolition of unearned work and labour incomes and the breaking of debt slavery. In consideration of the monstrous sacrifice of the life and property that each war demands of the people, personal enrichment due to a war must be regarded as a crime. Therefore, we demand ruthless confiscation of all war profits. The nationalisation of all businesses which have been up to the present formed into companies. That the profit from wholesale trade shall be shared out. An expansion on a large scale of old age welfare. We demand struggle without consideration against those whose activity is injurious to the general interest. Common national criminals, usurers, profiteers, and so forth are to be punished with death. And now for the answers. I'm afraid to say that I lied. Every single one of these policy points was from the Nazi Party's 25-point programme. None of these were explicitly stated by the Communist Party in Russia. And the point that I wanted to make with this is very straightforward. What the Nazi Party said to its people, what it promoted, what it advertised, not just in the 25-point programme, but in speeches and pamphlets and whatever else, and what the Communist Party said to its people through speeches, through pamphlets, through manifestos, or whatever else, that is irrelevant. They could be promising the earth, they could be promising a utopia, and in a lot of cases, they did just that. But that's all irrelevant. What matters is what they did, and what they did to their own people and other people around them is commit politicide, democide, and wholesale genocide, murder on an industrial level that has never been seen on this earth before and will hopefully never be seen again. But we are even today still feeling the ramifications of what happened because people believed in what they said and didn't think for a moment that anything bad could come from that. No one voted for the Nazi Party and no one supported the Communist Party because they thought that they would be on the chopping block, because they would be executed for frivolous reasons, for pointless reasons. No one thought that what happened to Germany, what happened to Russia, what happened to the people within those nations, nobody thought that was going to happen. If it had been the case, if people knew that was going to happen, then it's very likely, in my opinion, that they would not have gotten behind it. And it's this very reason, and this is perhaps the most weird, perplexing thing of our time, that a lot of people, very, very rightly, look at the term Nazi or fascist and they think, oh, no, I know what happened. It doesn't matter. I don't care what you said. I don't care about your old age welfare points. I don't care about equal rights for the citizenry. I know what the Nazis did. But flip that around and they look at the communists. Oh yeah, the communists. Oh, they actually, yeah, there's some stand-up guys. They're supporting this, it might be a little bit utopian, a bit more far-fetched, but they're actually looking out for the workers. They're looking out for the people. They want to help them, don't they? That's what they want. And they just completely ignore the fact that what every communist regime, or virtually every communist regime, throughout the period in which it's been around, since the 1920s, has been an oppressive, democidal, politicide, genocidal regime that has crushed individuality, crushed the rights of the people, to the point where as soon as I say, they loosen the grip, people throw off the shackles of communism at their earliest opportunity. And for some reason, this communism isn't treated in the same way as Nazism. And I just don't understand why. They're both incredibly oppressive regimes. From the outset, they state explicitly what their objectives are, and their objectives revolve around a large state cramming down on you. And if you cannot see that, then I don't know what I can do to convince you otherwise. I don't know, is another 100 million dead enough? What kind of figure are we going to look at before we go, this is probably not a good idea? After the first 10 million, at what point do you think, maybe this ideology is not all that? This is the kind of attitude that a lot of people have that I can't quite get my head around. And it's very frustrating for me, because from someone that prides himself on being quite rational and pragmatic and reasonable, I just can't see the rationale for people for supporting communism or being indifferent to communism, as opposed to just opposing communism in the same way that they would another horrific, oppressive, brutal, genocidal ideology like Nazism. Why are they not in the same box? They should absolutely be in the same box. People are suffering now because of communism. People aren't suffering now because of neo-Nazism. People are suffering now because of communism. So why is communism let off the hook so easily? I just don't understand it. But maybe there are people out there that do. So to add a bit of context to this conversation, I suppose, let's go through some of the estimates of how many people have been killed by communist regimes. I'm not going to go through an extensive list. Certainly I'll cover some of the larger ones, but I think that first, from the outset, the numbers vary. These are estimates, because we just don't know how many people died, how many people were killed, how many people were murdered. And when you're counting in the millions, I don't know at what point someone can turn around and go, you see, it wasn't 15 million people, it was only 12 million people. So, yeah, communism's not that bad then, is it? I mean, this is what I'm trying to get at here, is that, a state executing one person for distance, that is enough for a concern in the Western world, in a modern democracy. That would raise some serious questions, some really serious concerns. It might even topple a government. There might be riots in the streets. But for some reason, the same communists in the Western world that would pounce at the opportunity to highlight government oppression or murder, state-sanctioned murder in some form or another, they would jump at that opportunity, but they'll quite easily just brush aside the tens of millions of people that communist regimes have murdered, the tens of millions of people that have died because of the actions of those governments of those states. And again, it's just a weird perplexion to me. It's like the hypocrisy is uncanny. But that aside, so we had the Soviet Union, obviously, and I think there was an estimate around 20 million people were killed. In China, it was anywhere between 40 and 80 million, even if we went on the low end at 40 million, let's say, even lower than that, you could 20 million, 10 million, it doesn't matter. Once you get past the first 10 million, it's a bit pointless even having that conversation. Cambodia was always an interesting one for me, because it was around 1.5, 2 million people that were killed, and I think only over the span of about 3 years, oddly enough. And Cambodia was always a very interesting statistic for me, because even though that figure in real terms is obviously a lot lower than the Soviet Union or China, in terms of the actual population of Cambodia, that was about, I believe, 20 to 25% of the actual total population, which I suppose for context, if you're listening to this from the United Kingdom, it would be the equivalent of about 18 million people, I think, being killed in the United Kingdom under a communist government. Can you imagine, the Conservative or Labour government killing 18 million people in this country for, dissidents, I suppose. Or if you're listening from the United States, I think that would be about the equivalent of 80 million people. So yeah, I mean, just think about these sorts of numbers and the percentage of the population of Cambodia under a communist regime just wiped out, just like that. 3 years. It's just staggering to me that people, even now, I mean, you probably tell I'm getting a little bit flustered and a bit frustrated about this, because even now I can tell there are communists chirping away, and they're going, oh, don't listen to that, it's not true, it didn't happen, it wasn't quite like that. The favourite one, my favourite quote from a communist, that wasn't real communism. And we're going to discuss that now. So as we've already discussed in this video, communism just cannot work, because what it is trying to achieve is complete and total compliance to a system which is not enforceable. It requires the absence of the state to be able to achieve full communism. And so when communists come around and they say, well, that wasn't real communism, was it? Because it didn't achieve this or it didn't achieve that. It didn't achieve it because it can't. And so, as I said earlier in this video, this communist regime finds itself in a bit of a predicament. It can either loosen the reins so the state can lessen control of the population as intended by the communist mantra, by the communist doctrine, loosen the reins and then abolish the state. But the moment it does that, the people throw off the chains of communism. And so what do instead? They ramp up the oppression. They keep them under the boot. They want them under control, because as far as they're concerned, they would rather have a population that is quasi-communist, in that everyone is equally poor, equally subservient to the state, equally miserable, equally oppressed. They would rather have that than have a free market economy, a free market nation where people can progress, people can innovate, people can have property, people can become free in every literal conceivable way, because doing that would be admitting defeat. And they have seen what happens. The elite of those nations has seen what happens to those who loosen the reins of power, and it doesn't end well for any of them. And so what are the options that they have? None. And this is why communism does not work. Full communism is impossible to achieve. And I don't think it takes a scholar to really understand this. You can understand this just by seeing what they are trying to achieve and then realizing that what they are trying to achieve doesn't make sense. It can't make sense. It's impossible to do. And history has told us this many, 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 many times over. You've seen it even just in a snapshot of 100 years, however many dozens of countries, nations have been subject to a communist regime. One of two things happens. They throw off the yoke of communism, they throw off the chains of communism, they become free market democracies, or they ramp it up and they become even more oppressive. Those are the two options on the table. And that is why communism is evil, because it is inherently evil, because they are trying to achieve something that can't be achieved. And not only are they trying to achieve something they can't achieve, but they are doing so by crushing everyone underneath them. And this is the definition of evil, trying to oppress a people, murdering people in the pursuit of nothing, in the pursuit of absolutely nothing. And this is why communism is evil. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the hammer and sickle that I see time and again used by Micronations and time and again used within the Micronational community in some other capacity, that is, to me, is as bad as the swastika. And it should be treated with the same disdain, disgust, and revulsion as the swastika. And it is my hope that someone somewhere has watched this video and they have decided that they are not going to go down this route. They are not going to go down the communist route. Or maybe they are on that route and they've decided to jump off the path. If a single individual will watch this video and go, you know what, you're right, this isn't the one for me, I'll look at another system, I'll try again, that is my hope, that is my aspiration. I want more people to wake up to the fact that this is not a game, this is not funny, this is not fun, any more than it would be to have a neo-Nazi micronation or micronationalist, or just an individual advocating for neo-Nazism. Is that fun? Is that quirky? Is that just for the lols? Is that for the memes? If not, then why is communism any different? You tell me that. So if you wanted to show support for Stomaria, then please feel free to give this video a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.